Deep beneath a captured pirate ship, Turan found a blue-skinned boy chained in darkness. The boy called himself Armania, the 47th prince of a mermaid kingdom, but Turan had already raised one hand to end his life.
I have never eaten a human. Spare me, and I will give you treasure, the treasure left behind by the gods you worship.
He spoke of a blue-haired god resting at the bottom of the sea, his chest pierced by the fang of a colossal serpent. A relic still hung from the dead god's waist, untouched by rust and guarded by a force no mermaid could cross. By then, Turan had learned that legends could breathe, spirits could teach, and gods might leave their tools behind. But his road to that chained prince began weeks earlier, at a victory banquet where a rejected marriage proposal exposed a far stranger secret inside the Sky Library. Orem celebrated before the dust of the hunt had even settled. Food and liquor filled the streets, while the castle opened its stores so the surviving knights could eat until they forgot the men who had been broken beneath the monkey beast's stones. Turan watched the joy with a quiet unease.
What if another magical beast is blocking a different road, announcing complete victory? This quickly feels careless. You worry too much. Creatures that strong do not appear 2 or 3 at a time. And if another one does appear, we simply hunt again.
Her answer revealed more than confidence. A wizard lord did not rule because commoners trusted every announcement. A lord ruled because rebellion could be burned away. Izila could be wrong today and correct herself tomorrow without fearing that the city would stop kneeling. Lug Baltas soon joined them with a cup in hand. After Izela left to fetch food, he pressed strong Orem liquor on Turan, waited until 4 cups had passed, and finally asked the question hiding behind the family's hospitality.
What do you think of Izela? Do you truly feel nothing for my daughter? I think of her as the young lady of the house to which I owe hospitality. Nothing more.
Lug tried ambition next. Izila's growth had stopped too early, he explained. Without a powerful husband, she could not inherit House Baltas, and another nephew would take the seat. Turan heard the unspoken bargain clearly. Marry the daughter, gain a city, and become useful to the father.
I believe the head of House Baltas will make a wise decision without my interference.
The rejection ended Lug's warmth almost instantly. He asked Turan to announce when he planned to leave. Turan nearly laughed at the honesty of it, then used the Lord's wounded pride to ask about the library. Lug smugly explained its theft alarm and self-organizing shelves, functions no human attendant could perform unseen. The celebration continued behind him, but Turan's attention had already left the banquet. The next morning, he entered the Sky Library, not as an eager reader, but as a hunter who had finally noticed the thing watching from inside its own lair. The guard at the door welcomed Turan as usual. Inside, the middle-aged attendant sat behind his desk with the same patient smile he had worn for 6 straight days.
Welcome, Sir Turan. How did you know my name? You are only realizing it now? You are a slow one. I read the pass in your hand days ago.
Once Turan looked back, the clues felt embarrassing. The attendant never ate, drank, slept, or stepped away. He knew Turan's name, moved books without effort, and used an address no servant in Orem dared use. He had not been hiding well. Turan had simply been too happy among the books to notice.
Then how should I address you? I have never had a name. Call me the librarian. And do not suddenly become polite after ordering me around for days.
The banter made the revelation stranger, not less. The librarian was not an old wizard. He was the elemental spirit of the entire building. The man before Turan was only a projection, a reflection cast by shelves, walls, stone, and old magic. When Turan poked his hand, his finger passed through and struck the desk.
Stop that. I may be a projection, but it is still unpleasant.
The spirit could organize books and sound alarms, but he could not strike thieves or stop them from carrying knowledge away. Worse, no visitor had possessed the qualifications to see him for nearly 3,000 years. Turan was the first conversation he had held since an age that had vanished from human records.
My creator allowed only those whose bloodline had reached sufficient completeness to perceive me. Among every wizard I have seen in 3,000 years, you are the most complete.
Turan had entered the library expecting to expose a hidden servant. Instead, he found an ancient witness who looked at modern nobles and laughed at the word wizard. And that witness was now offering to look directly into the blood. Turan had spent his whole life hiding. With Turan's consent, the librarian pushed a spectral finger through his chest. There was no pain, only the uncomfortable feeling of being examined by something that understood bloodlines as structures rather than family names.
The dominant type is tracker and hunter. Sahar, I assume? But there is another one. Your bloodline is mixed.
Bloodline fusion was the origin of many great houses. Two inherited powers could combine into something broader, stranger, and stronger than either parent possessed. Yet Turan's second inheritance remained sealed, a condition often seen in the first generation of a new fusion.
Then the other half came from my mother.
He remembered a tired woman who had herded sheep alone, yet spoke with elegance, knew noble customs, and taught letters in a region where books were luxuries. Perhaps she had carried a bloodline too diluted to awaken. Perhaps her flight to Hisaril Hill had been part of a story she never lived long enough to tell. The discovery gave Turan a direction. House, Zahar, and the Enril Desert might hold his father's name. The sealed half might hold his mother's. But before he left, the librarian began teaching him from knowledge that no surviving book in Orem still contained. A droplet of water became a lens. Through it, Turan saw tiny organisms invisible to ordinary eyes. He learned that disease, decay, refraction, friction, heat, injury, and recovery were not isolated miracles. They followed causes, and a wizard who truly understood the cause needed far less power to command the result.
Glug Baltus was wrong. This library does contain a secret that can strengthen magic. It contains the truth of how the world works.
He rotted an apple with a touch, strengthened flame through friction, and understood why clouds made lightning easier. The librarian told him that these laws came from the old empire, and that the library itself had been created by the lame goddess, the greatest maker among the Priya god tribe. 10 joyful days passed too quickly. When Lug's hints to leave became impossible to ignore, Turan packed his new map and clothes. The spirit showed no human sadness, but Turan promised to return with stories from beyond the walls. Then he walked east, cleaner, wiser, and more certain that his parents' truth waited somewhere beyond Orem.
Come if you want, or do not. I can wait.
9 days later, his detection magic found hoofprints larger than his palm. They led not to prey, but to a crimson magical horse guarding an unconscious man, and 2 silver-haired dark elves, preparing to finish them both. The crimson horse stood over its fallen rider with blood on its hooves and fury in its eyes. Around them, 2 dark elf necromancers called up wolves, a wildcat, a buffalo, and other dead beasts wrapped in pale green spirit light. Turan did not attack immediately. Books called dark elves monsters, but books could carry the hatred of their authors. If the unconscious man had begun the fight, choosing the human side without knowing the truth would be no better than prejudice. Then, one of the dark elves complained that the human fingers he carried were too hairy. The other told him to eat his own. Turan's doubt vanished. He entered perfect concealment, moved within 20 steps, and fitted an almond-shaped stone into his sling.
Harden! Accelerate! Pierce! Target the head!
The first stone erased the male necromancer's head. Half the undead collapsed with him. The second shot struck a goat spirit guarding the surviving woman, and her answer came immediately. A luminous fox that flooded the forest with merciless white light. Bright light made concealment devour magic power. Turan could flee, but the horse and its master would die. He revealed himself, rubbed his hands together, and used friction, the simple cause of heat, to form a stronger fire than he had ever summoned before. One spinning fireball destroyed a wolf spirit. Another burned a charging deer, but the fox abandoned its light and tore into Turan's leg. The distraction cost him one heartbeat, and the undead buffalo struck him squarely, hurling him through the forest into a tree. His breath vanished. His organs felt displaced. For several seconds, the world became nothing but yellow sky, and the certainty that he had chosen a fight too large for him. The Crimson Horse chose that moment to strike. Tilly trampled the necromancer and forced 3 undead to turn away from Turan. While the woman hesitated between protecting herself and stopping the horse, Turan dragged his broken focus back together, concealed himself once more, and raised the sling. The final stone struck above her brows. When she fell, every remaining spirit lost its master. Turan collapsed beside them, too empty to stand, until Tilly lowered her great head and pressed her muzzle against his chest as if acknowledging another member of the herd. He rested only long enough to breathe. Then he absorbed 8 undead spirits, doubling the power inside him, and moved the unconscious stranger to safer ground. Victory had made him stronger. It had also left him close enough to death to understand that power alone had not saved him. Ashiz Berg awoke beside a campfire and called for Domik, the butler who had raised him. Instead, he found Turan sitting across the flames, and Tilly resting her head against his shoulder. The horse's trust convinced him before Turan's explanation did.
I saved you from 2 dark elf necromancers. Your horse helped save me in return.
The memories returned in pieces. Ambush, retreat, servants falling one after another, and Domik remaining until the final blow. Ashiz tried to hold himself like a noble before a stranger. His eyes betrayed him. Soon he was crying openly for 16 people the world would have called subordinates.
Forgive me. The people I lost were precious to me. They were the family that raised me.
Turan turned his gaze toward the fire and gave Ashiz the privacy of not being watched. He was too exhausted for elegant comfort, but that silence was kinder than false words. When Ashiz recovered, he invited Turan north to House Berg, a vassal family of Arabion, famous for crafting magic artifacts. Before leaving, they returned for the dead. Turan found signs that the necromancers had come from an organized underground settlement, but the discovery could wait. For hours, he and Ashiz gathered torn remains, recovered keepsakes, and dug 16 graves while Tilly stood watch. Ashiz shaped a stone marker and engraved a single line, "To my beloved family." Then he enchanted it, so animals would never smell the graves below. It was a small work by an enchanter, but it carried more devotion than the grand victory feast in Orem.
My father says mourning those who die righteously is weakness. If mourning family makes me weak, then I may never become strong. That is not weakness. It is kindness.
The silence afterward felt lighter. Near nightfall, Ashiz asked them to drop the formal speech between people who looked close in age. Then he extended one hand and used a word no one had ever offered Turan before.
Let us travel as friends.
Turan clasped the hand awkwardly. He had gained teachers, enemies, and hosts since leaving the hill. Now, beside 16 fresh graves, he gained his first friend and a road leading directly toward the house of Kiorn's people. Traveling with Ashiz immediately changed the meaning of camping. Tilly carried a cold storage chest, a water dispenser, an automatic shelter, an alarm, and clothes that cleaned themselves. Turan had crossed wastelands by drinking water extracted from birds. Ashiz crossed them with an enchanted household strapped to a horse.
Just give me the self-cleaning clothes. That would already repay your life. Those are not valuable enough. When we reach home, I will give you something worthy, or make it myself.
In Maderi, they warned the local ruler about a possible dark elf city. The lord showed more interest in buying Tilly than investigating missing humans. Ashiz refused. Turan quietly stored the lesson beside everything House Baltas had taught him. Power did not automatically create responsibility. On the road, they trained. Turan shaped fire into arrows, spears, and blades. Ashiz shared formal theory. Turan offered practical spells and carefully selected fragments of natural law. He never demonstrated Zahar concealment or detection, but even what remained made Ashiz increasingly suspicious that his new friend had trained since infancy.
How old are you anyway? 80? I will turn 19 in about a month. I am 43. This makes your talent much more irritating.
Ashiz then spoke of another young genius, Meisa Arabion, the skeletal princess of the main house, raised on concentrated funerals and expected to inherit the Storm bloodline at its highest level. Some believed she would one day destroy House Zahar. Turan listened without revealing that Zahar blood moved inside him. 15 days later, the landscape opened into wheat fields so vast that even noble eyes could not find their edge. Millions lived across the taken plains. Morgan stood at the center, with vassal cities circling it like smaller camps around an enormous herd. At the gates of Zabulon, a guard recognized Ashiz's voice and asked where his companions were. The brightness left Ashiz's face.
They have departed for the Celestial Palace. Please tell my family that I have returned.
The gates opened. Beyond them waited a family desperate to embrace the son they had nearly lost, and a guest whose arrival would make Turan's hidden Zahar blood more dangerous than ever. House Berg received Ashiz at the palace steps. Medela, the family head, and his mother abandoned all ceremony and pulled her 43-year-old son into her arms. Ashiz called her mom. His father corrected him to mother. For the first time since the graves, Turan saw his friend look like someone's child rather than a noble on pilgrimage.
This is Turan. He risked his life to save me. Without him, I would not have returned.
When asked for his family name, Turan chose a truth that concealed the most dangerous truth beneath it. His mother had been a commoner as far as he knew. His father was unknown. The Berg elders exchanged awkward glances, but none showed contempt. That alone explained much about the man Ashiz had become.
Since you saved a treasure of our house, House Berg will repay you. But an important guest is already staying here, and your background is unknown. I must ask you to lodge elsewhere. If the concern is me, there is no need. A man who saved Ashiz is unlikely to assassinate me tonight.
The speaker drifted from the corridor like a pale ghost. Meisa Arabion was only 21, yet her cheeks and eyes were sunken, her limbs thin enough to seem breakable. Turan's first uncharitable thought was that princess was less accurate than corpse.
I was nearly assassinated by Zahar recently. I came here to recover.
Turan kept his face still. The woman expected to become Arabion's next head stood within arm's reach, speaking casually about people with his bloodline. If she discovered his concealment or scent, no friendship with Ashiz would save him. The following morning, House Berg revealed a different kind of power. Water flowed from enchanted basins. Towels dried skin with a touch. White lamps lit the hall without smoke or shadow. To Turan, the estate felt less like a palace and more like a workshop built by generations who refused to accept inconvenience as natural law. At breakfast, Medela served a feast more lavish than Ashiz's birthday meals. Then she asked what kind of artifact could equal her son's life. Turan remembered the buffalo spirit, the bright fox, and the instant when one unseen attack had nearly killed him. His answer came without hesitation.
I want protection against surprise attacks. Harming others is easy. Surviving the first strike is harder.
The request would take a month, crafted by Mello with the borrowed durability of the Guardian bloodline. Accepting meant staying beneath Arabion's shadow for weeks. Refusing meant throwing away the finest defense Turan might ever receive. He chose to stay, and House Berg began quietly deciding whether a guest like him should ever be allowed to leave. Mello proposed a ring, earring, or necklace that could reproduce the Guardian bloodline for a short time. Medela corrected the scale of the offer. A head-level enchanter would devote a full month to it, then need months to recover before creating another work of equal quality.
If that is excessive, then you are saying my son's life is cheap. It is not.
The argument left Turan no graceful path to refuse. Yet once he and Ashiz stepped outside, his friend admitted what the family was doing. House Berg would shower a promising outsider with gifts, introduce a suitable woman, and hope gratitude became belonging.
They are trying to lure you into the family. Do not panic. My mother may be ambitious, but she will not force you into marriage.
That reassurance made Turan more uncomfortable. Hostility could be answered. A stated bargain could be accepted or refused. Kindness without a price created a debt that lived inside the receiver. Worse, a future child might awaken Zahar traits and turn any marriage into a confession delayed by decades. Ashiz refused to let him spend the month worrying. He dragged Turan into Zibilin and offered the standard pleasures of noble leisure: drinking, gambling, or women.
The library. Every answer you give makes you sound older and duller than me.
They compromised on a play. Turan had read about theaters but imagined actors as elaborate clowns. The idea that trained knights would perform on a stage sounded even more absurd. Then, among the posters outside Zabulin's finest theater, one title erased every other thought from his mind.
Hero Kiorn, you want to watch that one?
The gentle wanderer who had slept beneath Turan's roof was a stage hero in Arabion territory. 15 minutes later, the curtains opened on a version of the old war that turned Kiorn's modest memories into legend, and House Sahar into the villains of an entire generation. On stage, Arabion soldiers crossed into the desert. A quarrel became war, and a muscular actor played Kiorn as the first man to charge and the last to retreat. The face and body were wrong. The courage was not. The play claimed Kiorn had killed a Zahar noble alone, breaking the enemy's will and ending the 2-year war. Turan remembered an old knight who had called himself ordinary, even while carrying the graves of his wife, son, and closest friends inside every quiet sentence.
Was it true? Some of it. Arabion made the play, so naturally Arabion wins more cleanly on stage than it did in history.
They watched 3 more plays before leaving. Turan no longer saw actors as clowns. They were craftsmen who built people from voice and gesture, allowing the dead to walk for an audience that had never known them. The discovery gave him another thing to love beyond books and magic. On the road home, lightning struck beneath a cloudless red sky. Ashiz recognized Meisa's training and proposed a visit, mostly because he wanted to see his cousin lose at something for once. The garden they found looked as though a storm had been imprisoned inside it. Meisa's aura alone crushed the air around Turan. Her magic power exceeded his several times over, and she dismissed a direct contest as unfair. Ashiz argued that raw power was not Turan's true talent, so they chose a different duel. Each would show a spell the other did not know, and the faster learner would win. Meisa stamped the soil. Vines erupted, wrapped Ashiz from ankles to shoulders, and swung him through the air while she calmly explained plant growth and control. Turan realized she had not created life. She had accelerated seeds already hidden underground.
Grow.
Thin vines answered him on the first attempt. Meisa's interest sharpened. For his challenge, Turan called a rat, empowered the microorganisms inside it, and made living flesh decay in his hand. The spell consumed far more power than he expected, but he hid the strain.
I can do it too.
Meisa did not understand the cause, so she replaced knowledge with overwhelming power. The rat finally began to rot. Then the magic holding her starved body together vanished, and Arabion's future head collapsed into Turan and Ashiz's arms. Meisa woke beneath Medella's worried gaze. A bowl of rich soup waited beside her bed. Her body wanted it so desperately that her hands trembled. But the first mouthful brought 4 remembered faces into the room. Her mother and siblings, pleading through tears of blood. Meisa vomited and laughed, like someone trying not to sob. Turan knew none of that. He only knew that Medella had confined him in the temple beneath the estate until Meisa could speak. The chamber served as both shrine to the lame goddess and prison for people too important to place behind ordinary bars. Turan accepted the decision without protest. His guard was Haram Berg, a broad man of the Guardian bloodline. With nothing else to do, Haram drew an oversized sword and practiced beneath the goddess's statue. Every cut was too controlled to be brute force and too heavy to be ordinary technique. Turan watched until admiration escaped him aloud.
Are you interested in swordsmanship? I do not know yet, but it looks impressive.
Haram placed the hilt in Turan's hands. The sword was built for guardian strength and dragged at his shoulders like a block of iron. Turan copied one stance, then another, while Haram corrected feet, elbows, wrists, and the angle that would otherwise send the blade into Turan's own thigh.
Most nobles trust magic because it is easier. Real combat does not always allow distance. Build your body before the day an enemy takes distance away from you.
30 minutes later, Turan's wrists shook. Yet the lesson felt valuable precisely because magic could not replace it instantly. When Medella entered, she bowed and apologized. Meisa had awakened and confirmed that no attack had occurred.
We treated our benefactor unfairly. Your decision was reasonable. I would have been more concerned if House Berg ignored the collapse of Arabion's heir.
The answer eased Medella's embarrassment. It also impressed Haram, who left with the same unreadable face he had worn throughout the lesson. Before Turan could return to his room, Medella delivered one more message. Meisa wanted to apologize personally, and she still wanted the secret behind DK.
I am sorry you were confined because of me. It was necessary. I am more concerned that you are safe.
Meisa immediately returned to the unfinished contest. Turan explained that decay was biological enhancement applied to organisms too small to see. Once she understood, she reproduced the spell with almost insulting ease, then admitted that brute force success without understanding did not count as victory.
Tell Ashiz it was a draw. I refuse to let him become unbearable.
For her payment, Meisa offered an Arabion secret involving static electricity. Turan already knew it. Rather than end the exchange, she proposed something more valuable. Daily practice until she found knowledge he lacked. At dusk, the garden became their classroom. Haram claimed Turan's mornings. The training artifacts made metal heavier, multiplied gravity, and forced noble muscles beyond anything ordinary exercise could reach. After the first session, Turan lay in the wind, unable to lift his arms, while Haram calmly announced that rest was over and weapon practice would begin.
You were baited. He shows you a beautiful sword form, then drags you into hell. He did the same to me when I was 25. Then join me. I am far too old for such reckless behavior.
The days settled into a rhythm Turan had never known. Mornings with Haram, afternoons reading or watching plays with Ashiz, evenings trading spells with Meisa. His shoulders broadened, his lightning aim improved, and conversation became as familiar as silence once had been. By the third week, Meisa called him Turan without hesitation. Ashiz no longer treated training as a joke. Haram corrected him like a student rather than a guest. Turan realized, with some alarm, that House Berg had become the happiest place he had ever lived. That happiness made the approaching completion of the bracelet feel less like freedom and more like a departure. Before Turan could decide how much he regretted leaving, an Arabion messenger entered the garden with news that ended every private concern. 3 southern cities had fallen to a dark elf army. Meisa's expression barely changed when the messenger reported 3 destroyed cities, but the silence before her answer lasted too long. She was not being summoned as a daughter or a student. Arabion wanted its strongest young weapon returned to the battlefield.
Tell them I will return shortly.
Before leaving, she settled the debt she still believed she owed Turan. Electricity, she explained, did not exist only in clouds or rubbed objects. Tiny signals moved through the body, carrying sensation to the brain and commands back to the muscles. Accelerate those signals, and the world itself would appear slower. Turan tried. Meisa's voice stretched into a distorted echo. His own blink slowed. One step felt like moving underwater until pain stabbed through his temple and forced him to stop. Even for a few seconds, the spell's potential was enormous.
When you learn something better, you can repay me next time.
She flew away before Turan could answer. Only then did he understand that next time was the true gift. Ashiz urged him to remain in Zabaleen until the war ended, but Turan refused to trade his pilgrimage for indefinite safety or turn House Berg's generosity into a permanent obligation. A few days later, House Berg traveled to Morgan to see the punitive force depart. 27 Arabion nobles, 400 knights, and additional vassal troops filled the road. Meisa stood near the front, skeletal and exhausted again, as if her short recovery had already been taken from her. Then Badal Arabion appeared. Meisa's father looked ancient and ill, his skin pale enough to suggest collapse. His speech was brief. Kill every dark elf. Return only after humanity was safe. The crowd expected more. Badal raised one hand instead.
Advance believing that I stand behind you. This is the power of Arabion.
Clear sky blackened. Winds dragged clouds across the plains, and lightning began to fall, not once, but in a roaring rain that turned daylight into the judgment of a god. Tens of thousands screamed in fear and worship. Even Turan forgot to breathe. The display was protection, intimidation, and warning. Arabion's armies were leaving, but their enemies were meant to understand that the old head still possessed enough power to erase them. The librarian had once called Turan the closest wizard to divinity he had seen in 3,000 years. Watching Badal command the sky, Turan formed a quiet ambition.
One day, I will become that powerful.
4 weeks and 2 days after Turan arrived, Mello emerged from the highest workshop looking almost as gaunt as Meisa. In his hands lay a bracelet braided from leather and wrapped in dull blue metal. Even before Turan wore it, the artifact carried the weight of a month of concentrated work.
Wearing it strengthens your body slightly. Feed it magic, and it will reproduce the durability of the guardian bloodline. Do not maintain the highest output for long.
The bracelet was a masterpiece. Even great houses would covet. Mello boasted shamelessly. Then explained the care behind it with one gruff sentence. Ashiz might be a fool, but he was still Mello's younger brother. Repaying the man who saved him could not be done carelessly. Medela made one final attempt to recruit Turan. She asked him to join House Berg formally, not with threats or hidden conditions, but with the lingering hope of someone who had already heard from Ashiz that the answer would be no.
I cannot stay, but I will not forget what this house gave me. Ashiz and House Berg will remain my friends.
Haram waited outside with a plain dagger that kept its edge and resisted damage. The gift was modest beside the bracelet, but it came from a master who had found the only noble willing to take his martial teaching seriously.
Thank you, Master.
Haram's mouth twitched. He turned away before the expression could become visible. Ashiz came last, carrying durable travel clothes that cleaned themselves and repaired small tears. He had made them in secret between plays, meals, and magic practice.
You are a good friend, Turan, not because you saved me. Watching you refuse to waste your talent made me ashamed of how easily I wasted mine.
Ashiz promised to return to crafting, and someday attempt another, safer pilgrimage with Tilly beside him. Turan embraced him, crossed the gate, and stepped into the cold autumn wind. When night came, he lay alone beneath his cloak as he had after leaving Hasaril Hill. This time he laughed, because solitude no longer meant emptiness. He carried teachers in his habits, friends in his memories, and a defensive bracelet against the next unseen blow. 2 days later, beyond Arabion's harvested fields, he smelled smoke powerful enough to darken the road ahead. Beyond the taken plains, Turan resumed detection magic and found a boar magical beast with tusks long enough to impale a horse. Instead of reaching for his sling, he shouted and let it charge. Accelerated thinking slowed the world. Haram's footwork carried him one step aside, and the new dagger entered the beast's brain. The kill was unnecessarily close and strangely enjoyable. It proved that his month of training had become part of him. He sold the enormous hide in a nearby village, added 20 gold coins to his funds, and continued east until a smell interrupted the road. Ashes came first, then burned flesh. The wooden stockade ahead had collapsed inward, and the village square held bodies tied together before they were set alight. This was not hunger, war, or a beast following instinct. Someone had arranged the deaths. Through smoke and rot, Turan detected one living scent: sweat, urine, tears, and terror trapped beneath a half-burned house. He tore open a hidden attic door and found a girl of 8 or 9 pressed into the darkness, soot covering every part of her face except the paths carved by tears.
Calm down. I am not your enemy. I came too late to save the village, but I can still save you.
The child managed only a few words before collapsing. Everyone had died. A wizard had done it. Turan carried her outside, already planning water, food, rest, and a safe village where his name might protect her after he left. He stepped from the ruin and found 4 young wizards arranged in a half-circle. Their bodies smelled of excitement and fear, the scent of rookies standing before their first real enemy. A woman held an ice bow on Turan, while another man's flame spear trembled beside her.
Get on your knees, murderer!
Turan opened his mouth to explain. Gil panicked and released the spear. Fire crossed the distance toward the stranger carrying a child. Turan turned his body, caught the attack on one arm, and poured power into Mello's bracelet. The spear exploded around him. Flames swallowed both Turan and the child, and revealed why the gift from House Berg had been worth a month of a master's life. When the fire cleared, Turan's clothes were untouched, and the girl in his arms had not received a single burn. The young wizard stared, as if he had stepped from the flames as something inhuman.
I did not attack this village. If any of you attack again, I will stop explaining and begin defending myself.
Weapons lowered. Names followed. Vizen still demanded proof, but the child woke after half an hour and described a bearded man in red who had dragged the villagers together. She had watched from a crack in the attic while he searched for anyone left alive.
I am sorry. The scene misled us, but attacking before confirming the child's safety was Still our mistake.
The group had been hunting a killer called the Pyro Executioner, a noble-level wizard who tied villagers together and burned them alive. No survivor had ever described him before. Now they had a face, a sex, clothing, and one witness. Vizin accidentally mentioned a born tracker. Turan noticed Aisha, small and quiet, carrying a primitive fragment of Zahar blood inherited through an old marriage. The four were not assassins. They were runaways from Carmine and its vassals, pushed aside by stronger relatives and denied the magic power needed to continue growing.
Give up the hunt and return home. You are brave, but bravery does not make you prepared. Returning means accepting that we will never receive another chance. Help us. You may take the bounty, and even my share of the absorbed magic.
Gil, Aisha, and Kabak protested immediately, each trying to surrender their own share instead. The loyalty reminded Turan of Maiden's doomed hunters. He imagined finding these four torn apart after he walked away, and the old helpless regret returned.
All right, I will help. For now, assume my bloodline is guardian.
Before hunting, they placed the girl with a neighboring village. Turan paid generously and promised to return in several years. A lie meant to keep the villagers honest. On the road back, the child's final memory surfaced. The killer had called the villagers sacrifices and claimed their burning flesh would bring him closer to the gods. The group debated the murderer's claim while returning to the ruins. If commoners could be burned into bloodline power, every war would become a harvest of subjects. The idea sounded absurd precisely because the world would already have become worse if it were true.
Attack with the intent to kill. If an opportunity to capture him appears, take it. Do not risk everyone's life for answers.
Aisha led. She tested footprints of human men, rejected trails that merged with the road, then searched those routes again for lingering ash. Each failed attempt drained her power. They rested, resumed, and repeated the process 13 times while daylight faded.
I found it.
The trail ended at a hole too small for a person. Turan noticed the boulder beside it and pushed. Stone rolled away, revealing a human-sized entrance. The noise thundered through the cave, announcing them to anyone inside, but there was no longer a safe way to approach quietly. Turan and Vizin entered first. Deep inside, a ventilation shaft opened above a crude bed, burning torches and pots of unknown liquid. A bearded man in red sat at the center as if he had been waiting. Ash clung faintly to his clothes. His eyes were clear in the same unsettling way Maidan's had been.
Are you the wizard who has been abducting and burning the villagers?
The man denied understanding while one hand reached toward the floor. Turan activated accelerated thinking and the guardian bracelet at the same instant. Sacks of black powder exploded from both sides of the chamber. Turan shielded Vizin, Deal, Aisha, and Kabak were thrown down by heat and pressure. Vizin answered with an ice arrow through the murderer's thigh, but the wounded man slammed the ground and raised enormous stone hands from the cave floor. One hand seized Vizin. Turan slipped past the other in slowed perception, fired his sling, and shattered the wizard's casting hand. At close range, he rubbed his fingers, released a crude bolt of electricity into the man's chest, and watched the body convulse to the ground. Turan scattered seeds, grew vines around the prisoner's arms and eyes, and warned that the first sign of resistance would end his life. Behind him, Kabak crawled upright and began healing the others. The four runaways had found their target. Without Turan, they would already have joined the dead villages. Turan woke the captive with the flat of his dagger and warned him not to gather magic. Oval Craft tried anyway. The blade touched his throat. He stopped.
Answer quickly. Are you the Pyro Executioner?
When Oval hesitated, Turan drove the dagger into his uninjured thigh. The scream answered before the words did. Oval was 78, estranged from his family, and convinced that a god had selected him to become the founder of a new great house.
The god showed me how to gain other bloodlines, burn enough sinners, cover myself in their ashes, and the pyromaniac bloodline will become mine. You are insane.
Oval claimed he had seen many nobles gain new powers through similar rites, but he could not name the god or provide one verifiable person. Vizen's companions dismissed him as a madman. Turan remembered Maiden insisting ordinary humans could become wizards by killing magical beasts, and remembered the same strangely clear gaze. Further pain produced only repetition. The vines consumed Turan's magic, and no ordinary prison could safely hold a noble who expected death. After one final exchange of looks with Vizen, Turan cut Ovil's throat.
Killing a bound man feels like slaughtering livestock. He burned villages while people were bound. Do not mistake helplessness at the end for innocence.
A notebook beside Oval's bed contained maps, victim counts, attack plans, and formulas involving plants and minerals. Turan memorized the unknown recipes before the group absorbed the dead wizard's power. Kabak, whose healer bloodline made the gain less useful to him, stepped away with visible regret. Marav's lord paid the 1,500 gold bounty without demanding serious proof. Vizen's name was safer to believe than challenge. Turan received 750 coins, half the reward, because everyone understood who had truly won the fight.
Whatever Oval's claim was, we keep it among ourselves.
They parted. Vizen's group went west to seek beasts and achievement. Turan continued east with a bag heavy enough to become a new problem, a murderer's formulas in memory, and a mystery he could not pursue until he understood his own birth. Soon the wind grew damp, salty, and unlike anything he had ever breathed. The road ended at blue water without an opposite shore. Sunlight scattered across the North Sea until the horizon seemed made of metal and fire. Turan had seen illustrations. None had prepared him for a world so wide that land itself could disappear. Abacha crowded a great peninsula with masts, curses, sweating sailors, foreign fruit, and magical sea beasts hanging from ship hulls. Turan bought dates from Enril, learned that merchant vessels rarely accepted passengers, and was told to search the harbor taverns after dark. He spent the afternoon wandering, and even watched another play. At night, he entered a respectable sailor's tavern, ordered wine and cheese, and listened until two men complained about a ship bound for Enril. Their owner had refused to hire a knight, despite pirates, mermaids, and deaths on the previous voyage.
I heard your ship needs a wizard.
He touched their wine and froze it solid. 10 minutes later, Captain Pyers arrived, sunburned, one-eyed, and experienced enough not to grovel. In a private room, he asked whether Turan was a noble or knight.
A knight. I have personal business in Enril.
Pyers did not trust the smooth-faced youth carrying only a dagger. He asked for water and ice. Turan lifted a glass, vaporized it, froze it, shaped the ice, and moved every piece through the air. The captain's doubts shifted from whether Turan was capable to whether his story was believable.
We cannot pay a knight properly. In fact, we cannot pay anything until the cargo is sold in Enril. That is acceptable. I need the passage more than the wage.
The next morning, after a final meal of shellfish and grilled fish, Turan boarded the three-masted Blue Marlin. Osman, the eager first mate, treated him like a visiting god. Renak, the coarse boatswain, welcomed him by cursing the shipowner, who replaced dead sailors as cheaply as broken planks. His cabin was narrow enough to touch both walls at once. Turan placed his heavy bag in the chest, lay beneath the small shuttered window, and listened as the harbor bell rang. The route to his father's desert was about to leave land behind. The Blue Marlin left Abacha beneath 3 full sails. Turan spent the first hours reading ship regulations and sailor superstitions. No women aboard, no whistling, no staring into the sea at night, and a whipping for nearly every offense. The mermaid legends were more enjoyable than the rules. On deck, Osban explained that the North Sea could carry a ship like an arrow one day and swallow it the next. Knights demanded high pay because magic could not save them once exhaustion turned them into ordinary drowning men. The answer made sense. Every landscape had dangers that power could not simply command away. Pyres explained the trade. Cotton, grain, and cloth filled the hold on the way to Enril. Spices and gemstones would fill it on the return. Turan admitted he might remain in the desert for years. Finding a father from 18 years of silence would not be solved by walking into House Sahar and asking the first person he met. While Turan learned ropes, sails, watches, and the sour cabbage that prevented sailors from dying with bleeding gums, Meisa fought a war that refused to present a proper battlefield. Dark elf fighters emerged from tunnels, overwhelmed isolated knights, and dragged the dead underground to become undead soldiers. Meisa could erase dozens with branching lightning, but overwhelming power meant little against enemies who vanished whenever she approached.
Do not overextend yourself. You are worth more than several knights. Tell me when the tunnels are found. I will clear them myself.
She flew away before Kadram finished advising rest. His smile disappeared the moment her back turned. The affectionate uncle muttered that Meisa had been raised carelessly and might end like her mother and siblings. Even among allies, the air of Arabion carried threats no lightning could burn. Back at sea, the first week passed without storm, mermaid or pirate. Turan learned from idle sailors until they forgot to fear his questions. He ate hardtack beside them and listened to Renak curse shipowners, weather, ropes, and any god responsible for pickled cabbage. The calm ended during lunch when the masthead lookout spotted a medium ship without a noble flag. It turned when the blue marlin turned. It accelerated when they tried to flee. Pyres looked once at Turan before making the decision that placed every life aboard in his hands.
Can you handle them? Unless they have a noble... Yes.
Pyres ordered the blue marlin to turn and meet the pursuer head-on. The pirate shouted promises of mercy from several hundred meters away. Renak admitted that such promises depended entirely on their mood. Turan's remaining hesitation disappeared. When the gap narrowed to several dozen meters, Turan bent his knees and jumped. He crossed open sea in one arc and struck the pirate deck hard enough to split the planks beneath his feet. 70 armed men stared at the young knight who had arrived without a bridge. Someone screamed for them to attack. Turan raised seawater over the rail, released its heat, and transformed it into a storm of ice spikes. More than a dozen pirates fell before one of them finished shouting, "Run!" He could have ended the rest with another volley, but that would expose too much. Turan formed a long ice sword and entered close combat. Haram's footwork guided his balance on the moving deck. One cut removed a head, another opened a throat, a wider swing carried through 3 bodies. Blades reached him from every direction. Some struck his neck, back, and shoulders. None broke the skin protected by noble flesh and the guardian bracelet. The pirates understood that surrender would not save them. So terror drove them forward until terror had no bodies left to move. 3 minutes after Turan landed, he was the only person standing. The deck had become a field of blood, broken ice, and dying men calling for mothers who would never know where they fell. The blue marlin caught up. Sailors crossed by rope and erupted into cheers until they noticed Turan covered in blood and torn clothes. He explained that none of the blood was his. Their fear transformed into something close to worship.
The ship belongs to you. You ended the battle alone.
Pyres proposed selling it in the North Sea archipelago. Turan offered 2/10 of the profit in exchange for crew labor and Pyres handling the sale. The captain had expected greed from a wizard. Fair wages surprised him more than the massacre. The crew celebrated with drink while 2 ships traveled together. Then, a search party emerged from below the captured vessel with a report that silenced the deck.
Captain, there is a mermaid chained beneath the ship.
The mermaid was not a beautiful woman from a sailor's fantasy. He was a blue-skinned boy of 12 or 13, chained in the hold and furious at being called male, as though the word itself were an insult.
I am Armania, the 47th prince of North Estadale. Show respect, land dwellers.
His voice was more beautiful than any instrument Turan had heard in a theater. Pyres asked whether he could transform into a giant fish, the mark of mermaid royalty. Armania claimed he needed the ocean and full strength. Turan and Pyres reached the same conclusion. The boy wanted to be released before proving anything. A male mermaid had little market value, and mermaids were known to sink ships and eat survivors. Turan decided a swift death was safer than carrying an uncertain predator. He raised one hand.
I have never eaten a human. Spare me, and I will give you treasure left by the pre-gods.
Armania described an underwater cave where a blue-haired man lay with a giant sea serpent's fang through his chest. The man's hand had pierced the serpent's skull. Everything had decayed, except the body and a round metal object still hanging from his waist.
I could not approach it. Something pushed me away. Only one of your gods could kill a serpent our ancestors worshipped and remain unrotted beneath the sea.
The story sounded impossible. It also sounded uncomfortably compatible with everything the librarian had taught Turan about the old empire. When asked how he had been captured, the prince admitted that he transformed into a fish, saw bait on a hook, and allowed instinct to defeat royal dignity. Pyres quietly admitted he had realized Turan was no ordinary knight. The confession was less accusation than plea. He knew who held power and had no intention of competing for a sacred relic. Turan accepted the message and kept Armania alive. The prince placed the cave roughly 500 kilometers south, near Miguel Island, the same island where the Blue Marlin intended to sell the captured ship. Turan could sell Armenia safely, or gamble on a story about a dead god. For several days, he delayed the choice and began learning who his prisoner actually was. Turan brought Armenia food and questions. The prince called him kind devil, explained that human ancestors had destroyed the old world of other races and ate bread without complaint. He claimed lower mermaids might attack humans from hunger, but he had never tasted one himself.
When I return, I will ask my father why some of our people eat humans.
He spoke as though release were inevitable, and the confidence made it harder to see him as a monster. Armenia knew direction and distance at sea instinctively. Each day, as the ships approached Miguel, he measured the relic's location more precisely. At Miguel Island, Pyres asked for Turan's decision. Selling the prince would provide safe profit. Searching at night would risk deception, drowning, and a relic that might not exist. Turan asked for a small boat built for two.
You will truly free me if we find it? Yes. Even if the object is useless, guiding me there will fulfill your side.
Under the full moon, Turan wrapped Armenia's features in cloth, chained him to the rowboat, and pushed away from Miguel. Instead of dragging the boat directly, Turan learned to move the water around it, opening a path ahead while pressing from behind and both sides. An hour later, a tiny uninhabited island appeared. Before landing, Turan scooped seawater and used scent through the water to search for other mermaids. None answered. Armenia had not led him into an ambush. The entrance was a pond connected to the sea through a vertical cave roughly 100 meters deep. Turan tied Armenia to a tree. The prince's first concern was not betrayal, but being left to starve if Turan drowned.
Let us hope that does not happen for both our sakes.
Turan removed his clothes except for the guardian bracelet and dagger, filled his lungs, sealed his eyes against the water, and dove. Moonlight vanished above him. Darkness opened below, and his Zahar sight found the outline of something nearly 100 meters long waiting at the bottom. The shape beneath Turan was a giant sea serpent, several meters thick and nearly 100 meters long. Moss had turned its coils into terrain. 4 horns crowned its head, and rows of teeth remained locked around a final battle fought ages ago. A blue-haired man stood embedded in the serpent's skull, with one hand driven through bone. A broken fang had pierced his chest. His armor had decayed, yet his body remained untouched, eyes open as though death had interrupted him only moments ago. Neither corpse had become undead. Neither offered magic power to absorb. Turan memorized the man's face, hair, eyes, and remnants of armor for later study. God or wizard, this was someone who had died killing a creature once worshipped by mermaids. He deserved respect. At the waist hung a round metal case, no larger than Turan's palm. It had survived while the belt beneath it rotted. Turan offered a silent apology to the dead and reached out. No force pushed him away. Instead, something extended from the metal, searched through his body, and ended with a click heard inside his mind. Turan did not understand the mechanism. He understood the result. The relic had recognized him as its owner. As he swam upward, a new sense awakened. Before he saw the pond, he knew Armania waited above. When Turan surfaced, he saw pale blue light spread through the prince's gills, ears, and heart. The relic was showing him something living inside another being. Setting the object down made the light vanish. Picking it up restored the sensation. Turan now knew at least 2 functions. It sensed nearby life, and it revealed an inner light whose meaning remained unknown.
So, am I free?
The chains fell from Armania's arms and legs. He remained still, shocked that Turan had not taken the relic and changed the bargain.
I gave my word.
Armania thanked the kind devil, promised absurd protection if mermaids ever fought humans, and dove into the pond. Beneath the surface, the child became a young shark and vanished into the sea. His claim of royalty had been true after all. Turan returned to the rowboat alone, turning the round case in his palm. It had chosen him where it rejected a mermaid prince. Whatever answer waited inside the empty metal shell, the search promised to be as enjoyable as any book the librarian had ever placed in his hands. The relic worked from inside Turan's pocket. On the return to Miguel, he sensed schools of fish as clusters of sparks beneath the water. On the blue marlin, sailors appeared mostly gray with tiny flames in their hearts, while the royal mermaid's light had spread through several parts of his body. Turan recorded the difference without understanding it. The next morning, Relic whipped sailors who had returned late from shore leave. Turan disliked the blood, but did not overturn rules the crew had accepted. Through the relic, the injured men showed blue flames disturbed by red, another clue connecting the mysterious light to bodily condition. Captain Samudel bought the captured vessel for 1,000 Zahar gold coins. He also offered a letter to House Berg in Komad, where Turan might exchange wealth for a trained magical beast instead of carrying bags of coin across the desert.
I am not giving charity. I know you can afford what they sell. I am simply helping buyer and seller meet.
2 days later, the Blue Marlin sailed again. The crew praised the profitable voyage, the clear weather, and the descendant of the gods traveling among them. On the 3rd day, the sea answered their confidence with black clouds. Rain and lightning struck before the sails were fully lowered. A wave hit the hull and threw a sailor from the highest mast. His fall stopped in open air. Turan lowered him to the deck, then used magic to pull ropes, secure sailcloth, restrain rolling cargo, and catch 2 more men before the sea claimed them. Once everyone except the helmsman was below deck, the problem changed. Dozens of sailors stood soaked and shivering among cargo with no room to move. The storm might spare the ship and still kill them through cold.
Everyone, form a circle around me. A fire here could spread through the ship. then I will not allow it to spread.
Turan planted his feet against the rocking deck and held a contained flame above one palm. With the other hand, he guided air through the circle, carrying warmth evenly without letting fire touch wood, rope, cloth, or skin. Blue lips regained color. Shaking hands slowly became still. The sailors had cheered when Turan slaughtered pirates. This silence was different. They watched a wizard spend power not to dominate an enemy, but to care for men who could offer him nothing equal in return. Humans served wizards. Wizards ruled humans. But the old teaching contained one more command, the part too many noble houses treated as optional. Wizards were also meant to protect and care for them. In the storm-dark hold of the Blue Marlin, Turan finally understood what that duty could feel like from both sides. Turan had left Hisaril Hill believing the world was divided into shepherds, dogs, sheep, and wolves. Chapters of travel had made those roles harder to separate. A noble could sacrifice servants or mourn them as family. A monster could eat humans or keep every word of a bargain. A wizard could rule through fear or hold a flame, so ordinary sailors survived the night. He now carried a fused bloodline no one fully understood. A bracelet made from gratitude, a dagger from a master, clothes from his first friend, knowledge exchanged with Arabion's heir, and a relic that had chosen him beside the corpse of a possible god. Ahead waited Komad and the Enril Desert, the homeland of House Sahar. Somewhere beyond that shore lay the name of Turan's father, the sealed inheritance of his mother, and perhaps the meaning of the strange lights now visible inside every living being. The shepherd was finally approaching the land of his own blood, and the world had already begun revealing that his blood was not the only mystery hunting him.